So I want to welcome you all on behalf of End Abortion Stigma and the First Unitarian Society of Ithaca. End Abortion Stigma is thrilled to present this program to you this evening about this little-known piece of Ithaca history. My name is Nancy Miller, and I am both a member of End Abortion Stigma and this church. End Abortion Stigma is a group of women. Most of us came of age before Roe v. Wade. We are unapologetically pro-abortion. Some of us faced unexpected pregnancies before Roe. We tell our stories. We do education programs, especially for high school and college age groups. We write letters to the editor. We promote pro-abortion legislation. We support abortion funds, and we have a reproductive rights film festival in the fall. I want to thank all the members of End Abortion Stigma who have contributed in so many ways to creating this program and its promotion, especially Carol Kammen, Sue Perlgut, Joan Adler, Carolyn Cox, and Linda Hoffmann. The First Unitarian Society of Ithaca has long supported activism and activists. I want to thank the ministry visioning team for co-sponsoring this event for use of this space. Some of what will be talked about happened right here in this building. I want to thank the social justice leadership team for their help in publicity. I want to thank John Gaines for doing sound for us tonight. And thanks to Lauren Stefanelli for taping the program, which will be available on Pegasus, our local community media center, and on YouTube. And thanks to Michelle Waffner, our congregation administrator, for many, many pieces of logistics. So our program tonight is first the reading, and then a talk by Reverend Richard Gilbert, who was minister of this church at that time, the time period that we'll be talking to, 1965 to 1970, and then there will be a time for questions and discussion. Members of End Abortion Stigma tonight would like to dedicate this evening's program to the memory of Laura Peters. Laura participated in a reading, a private reading at First Baptist Church a few weeks ago of this when the clergy went underground. She was moved to comment about her own abortion and expressed a strong interest in coming to join End Abortion Stigma in our work. Tragically, she died a few days later after a severe fall. May her story and her interest be inspiring. The reading tonight. The reader's script by Carol Kammen is adapted from a lecture given by the late Reverend David Evans, former minister of the First Baptist Church. The talk was entitled, "When Some Clergy Went Underground, a chapter in the human rights, human reproductive struggle." It was given on October 22nd, 1999 at the DeWitt Historical Society of Tompkins County. It was part of their lecture series, Towards a Common Standard of Rights and Freedoms. The readers are Dave in order here. Okay, Dave Dietrich, Liz Weisbrod, Mike Hoffmann, Carol, Linda Hoffmann, and Carol Kammen, sorry. The reading is directed by Sue Perlgut and produced by Joan Adler. So I'm not going to I'll let the reading tell this amazing story of Ithaca history that I sure wasn't aware of until very recently. It's amazing.
Of course not. It was not planned. It is 1968, and I'm only 19 years old. I asked about carefully, you understand. It turns out that someone Stephen knows, has heard of, he's supposed to be trustworthy. You won't believe this. He's a local minister, a Baptist minister.
There were several local women who, over a 2-year period, had conducted interviews of representatives of social and health agencies, colleges, minors, and unmarried women, and found no community agency that offered a family planning educational program.
We also contacted Planned Parenthood for the advantages and obligations of affiliation with a national organization. We became convinced of the need for a family planning agency in our county and set up a steering committee.
I was asked to be a member of that first board of directors and to chair the Clergy Advisory Committee.
A minute, please. I need to give you some context. All this was happening in Tompkins County in the 1960s, when any number of medically related services were being founded, along with some social service agencies, mostly designed to step into places where government or current medical aid did not venture. As the county population expanded, people came seeking expertise and comfort that was not yet available.
Displaced homemakers.
The Racker Center,
Rape Crisis Center,
The Cayuga Chamber Orchestra, the brass band, and several dance companies.
Suicide Prevention, Hospicare.
They all sprouted as do daffodils in spring. This was, of course, not the first crop for Tompkins County, had been part of the burned over district, that flowering of religious and perfectionist organizations that appeared in the second quarter of the 19th century. Educational reform, prison reform, temperance societies, communitarian efforts, utopian communities, religious sects. They all grew here, flaring up, dying down, and flaring up again like a prairie fire that seems to be out and then springs again to life. Central New York burned with ideas, some lasting, some others quite loony, that faded away. So it was in the 1960s and 70s in Tompkins County, a time of ferment. It is what made this county what it has become today. It stands out. History, you know, always had something to say in an attempt to explain events. So say I, your historian.
In April 1968, Planned Parenthood opened an office in space donated by the First Presbyterian Church, later expanded into the First Baptist. Not long after, a couple seeking an abortion knocked on that door.
Abortion was illegal. Planned Parenthood was in no position to offer help at the time, so inquiries were directed to me as chair of the Clergy Advisory Committee. Within a couple of weeks, we began to have visitors looking for information about abortion. I have to admit that for the first young couple, university students, I was less than an effective counselor.
We need help and don't know where to turn.
I found myself trying to talk them out of wanting an abortion. I was not really listening. Still, having been open about abortion choice and the need to change the law, this was the first time in my professional life to be confronted by persons actually wanting an abortion.
We can't have a baby. We're not ready. I'm only 19.
Then it occurred to me, and I said, Dave, what you are doing is not your prerogative. Then the grace and mercy of God began to flow within me.
My boyfriend needs to finish his degree.
I knew that the Judson Memorial Baptist Church in Greenwich Village offered a clergy consultation service on abortion. So I called my friend Howard Moody to ask if he could be helpful to the couple.
The pastor in New York City gave Reverend Evans the information, and we went forward.
Over the next month or so, I was able to refer persons to New York City, about one a week. Then a call came in.
David, it's Howard Moody here. We have so many people in this city asking for help. We can't accept anyone outside the metropolitan area.
So what can we do? The need is so much greater than I ever imagined.
How about starting an upstate service?
I knew I had to do something locally, so 7 religious workers in Ithaca, Protestant and Roman Catholic, formed the Upstate Clergy Consultation Service on problem pregnancies. We soon became a group of 13 and referred women who chose abortion to qualified, licensed physicians. In time, our load became so heavy we organized satellites in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, and Albany.
We chose to be a service of problem pregnancies rather than abortion. We wanted to communicate that we were open to options. We wanted as much acceptance as possible.
The term problem pregnancy was never questioned.
The telephone number was 607-273-7172. Women would call that number and hear a taped message made by a woman, the secretary of First Baptist, indicating the name and phone number of clergy one would call in their area. A new message was taped every Thursday night. The answering machine was in the office of First Baptist.
All of this was totally illegal at the time. Everyone needed to be careful. While willing to help, no one really wanted to go to jail. It was much like the abolitionists of the mid-19th century. Most of them wanted to act, but getting caught would have placed them and their families in grave danger. Both were very much undercover activities.
We were underground, but it was becoming evident that the risk of exposure was increasing. The service was needed and wanted. We understood that in going public, we should not mention First Baptist or the church's other than usual ministry.
Wanting to avoid as much fallout as possible, the answering machine was moved to the basement of the secretary's home.
Protestants of several denominations, Roman Catholics, 1 priest, 2 sisters, and 1 Jew were members of the service. Denominational relationships of the coordinators, very strategic persons, were Unitarian in Buffalo and Rochester, and American Baptist in Syracuse, Utica, Albany, and Ithaca. First Baptist secretary was a Rockefeller Republican and former chair of the county Republican committee. She was politically astute, a mother, grandmother, and a friend of many. She was compassionate towards persons with problem pregnancies, and especially those she knew who had tragic abortions.
As the consultation services expanded, more women sought services.
I found it necessary to reduce my consulting load to devote time to securing doctors for Ithaca and satellites. This involved travel. Unless it could be a therapeutic abortion, we did not ever refer women to physicians in New York. For under state law, it was a criminal offense to perform, prescribe, or submit to an abortion unless it was necessary to preserve the life of the mother.
It was also a criminal offense to manufacture, give or sell an instrument, medicine, or drug with the intent to be used in ending a pregnancy. 42 other states had similar laws.
Because the law was strict with physicians and women who submitted to abortion, legal counsel advised that we cross state lines to confuse the issue for the states. The National Clergy Network made it possible to recommend physicians in their areas. We also needed to be concerned for ourselves.
Then as now, each state had its own laws, mostly spurred on by the dreaded Anthony Comstock, who advocated that information about abortion not be allowed to pass through the U.S. mails.
It was a misdemeanor to give advice about abortion to women pregnant fewer than 26 weeks, and a felony for pregnancies 26 weeks and over. The state penal code, the criminal facilitation, made it a Class A misdemeanor for
A person who intends to commit a crime engages in conduct which provides such person with the means or opportunity for the commission thereof, and which in fact aids such person to commit a felony.
We did not advise, we did not admit to doing anything illegal. We were counseled that persons who arrange for another to commit a crime endanger themselves under the criminal facilitation section. We did not arrange, but we did give information. We clergy, adept at interpretation and innuendos of words in the theological world, needed help in courts of law. However, there were no charges ever pressed or that went to trial. Incidentally, we had an understanding that if one clergy was arrested, all of us would be there. Suffice it to say, we believed, we knew, that what we were doing outside the law was less immoral than the law itself.
David Evans went off to meet the physicians to be sure they were in good standing, and the national network exchanged information about physicians. There were some guidelines.
Physicians would not perform an operation if the woman was more than 12 weeks pregnant. A doctor in Puerto Rico limited it to 8 weeks. Physicians in England and Japan, where abortion was legal, were willing to operate up to 26 weeks. Physicians' fees would not exceed $350.
Equal to $3,569.01 today.
And some were less. Physicians were to have security systems in place, including entrances to offices and overnight accommodations.
David would case the joint, so to speak.
I did so to be sure that I would feel secure and to be able to describe the layout to others. Another stipulation was that there were no commission or remuneration from physicians to clergy. Clergy were not to accept financial contributions from consultants either. Contributions were used as discretionary funds to provide transportation or living arrangements. This fund was administered by non-clergy living in Ithaca, and clergy made a monthly contribution to the fund in order to pay telephone bills as well as travel expenses.
I called the number 607-273-7172. I had to get a certificate from my doctor confirming that I was pregnant, and then a voice on the phone gave me information as to how to communicate with the physician.
If the woman seemed ambivalent, no information was given, as such women might or might not return. Some women were referred to an approved home for unmarried women.
Most unmarried women did not want their parents to know, and most parents were unaware. Married couples often opted to go to England rather than to another state.
There was one dreadful instance. A woman opted to go to Puerto Rico, got a taxi from the airport, but was lured away from the address she had been given and was assaulted and had a botched abortion. When she returned to her campus, the medical director there wanted to call in the district attorney. After a number of clergy called and talked to him about the consequences for the young woman, her family, and the consultation services, he decided not to go to the authorities. After that, each woman had to have a traveling companion. This was the closest we came to the county district attorney crossing the parking lot to the First Baptist.
I was told not to eat or drink for 8 hours before my appointment, and not to talk to other women in the doctor's office as to why they were there. I was to remain at least 2 hours after the operation. All went well, and I went back to my classes the next Monday.
There are records of the women we helped, of the couples we aided. Female, 17, high school junior Catholic. Male partner, 16, high school junior Catholic.
Female, 19, engaged, college student, Protestant. Male partner, 23, engaged, college student, Catholic.
Female, 18, nurse's aide, divorced with 2 children, 5 and 7, Protestant. Male, 29, auto body shop worker, single, Catholic.
Female, 20, unemployed, Catholic. Male, 23, student, married, no religious preference.
Female 21, student, black Muslim. Male 19, student, Christian Scientist.
Female, 21, student, Protestant. Male, 26, teacher, Protestant. When told of her pregnancy, he disappeared.
Female 20, student, Catholic. Male 21, student, Catholic. They chose to marry.
Female, 17, homemaker, divorced, Protestant. Male, 29, employed, married.
Female 37, homemaker, married, Catholic. Male 40, employed, married, Catholic.
Female, 23, employed, single, Protestant. Male, 23, employed, single.
Certainly, Jewish women also became pregnant, but there was not generally the same concern for secrecy from family, nor was there the issue of sin. Jewish law only considers a fetus a person at birth. Life does not begin at conception under Jewish law. Sources in the Talmud note that the fetus is mere water before 40 days of gestation. Following this period, the fetus is considered a physical part of the pregnant individual's body, not yet having life of its own or independent rights. The fetus is not viewed as separate from the parent's body until birth, and the first breath of oxygen into the lungs allows the soul to enter the body.
Woman 20, student. She had been raped. We heard afterwards from many of those we helped.
When I woke in the morning, I felt peace, not guilt. No guilt. I knew I was all right, but most of all, my fears were gone. I returned home with this joy of knowing I would make it.
One of the best physicians we worked with, who gave his patients time after the operation to talk about their feelings,
was a large black man with an enormous afro. He came to regional clergy meetings to explain the operation, and he would return as improvements in technique became possible. Not all doctors could meet this humane standard.
While aiding patients and making arrangements for operations, there was a second drama taking place.
On February 2nd, 1970, there was a front-page article in the Ithaca Journal that asked the question, "Want counseling on a problem pregnancy?" The article continued that an announcement had been made that morning by a group of 60 upstate New York clergy of many denominations of the formation of the Upstate New York Clergy Consultation Service on Problem Pregnancies, with 6 units, including one centered in Ithaca. The state coordinator and spokesman, Reverend David Evans, pastor of First Baptist Church, stated,
"The needs of the women are paramount. We are concerned that women who want to have an abortion have a safe abortion."
The news release was like a lightning bolt. Throughout upstate New York, more than 60 clergymen and women went public with their underground activities. We wanted women whose pregnancy was problematic to receive a safe medical abortion by a licensed physician. Others joined our work. Our ultimate goal, however, was repeal of the existing punitive state statute. That Groundhog Day of 1970, we stuck our head out of the ground and risked whatever the future was to bring.
We knew that what we were doing was essential for individual lives, but that the law needed to be changed. I contacted Republican State Assemblywoman Constance Cook to come to a meeting. She later recalled,
"A woman friend told me she was going to England to accompany a friend to have an abortion. She said, 'Well, you should know what I'm doing.' This was the first I realized that the Clergy Consultation Service was operating right here in Tompkins County. Mr. Evans came to see me. He said he wanted me to meet with a group of clergy in the area. He didn't tell me what it was about, but I could tell by the way he made the appointment that he wanted a firm commitment from me. That's not always easy for a legislator, but because he was fussy, I realized that it was important, and I went. When I walked into the meeting room in the Baptist church, there were probably 20 to 25 people there, most of whom were clergy of all different sects, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, male and female. They came from as far as Buffalo and from over the upstate area. It was obviously the Upstate Clergy Consultation Group. They told me what they were doing. They didn't introduce themselves, but they wanted me to continue to push forward the abortion bill. They wanted to know what they could do to help. Well, this was just the greatest thing in the world because it was exactly what we needed.
David Evans was born in 1928 in Wales and came through Ellis Island to the United States as an infant. David met his wife, Grace, at church in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they married in 1952. Reverend Evans at the time was an undergraduate at Nebraska Wesleyan University. He received graduate degrees from Colgate Rochester Divinity School and Union Theological Seminary. He served as pastor of First Baptist Church in Ithaca from 1966 to 1994. The words spoken here by our David Evans are those that Reverend David Evans wrote. The woman at the end of the phone was his wife, Grace Evans.
At a memorial service held on April 15th, 2023, David was described as someone with heart, someone who made and crossed bridges, a man who loved all music and especially good food. Mostly, David Evans honored people's stories. The work that began as the Clergy Consultation Service for troubled pregnancies is today carried out legally and with sound medical outcomes in New York at Planned Parenthood clinics and in hospitals. Well, that was true everywhere when I first wrote this piece. But in June 24th, 2022, the United States Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade and brought on an onslaught of states who revoked a woman's right to have control over her own body and her own future. These laws were promulgated by people who inserted their own personal beliefs, which we do not deny them, but which they have imposed on all women. They deny women a perfect personhood, as promised by our Constitution.
We honor the work of Reverend David Evans and his story and that of others, men and women together, who made the Clergy Consultation Service for troubled pregnancies possible. We recognize that change can only come by working together, people of good faith, to bring about a world of fairness and equality. To us today, who have lived through those years when abortion was illegal and difficult to manage and expensive, the meanness of our times is unimaginable. That people want to legislate for all women in any circumstance can only cause all of us harm. We cannot, must not go back on this promise to women that each is able to determine safely and legally the trajectory of her own life. In 1998, with abortion in the country legal and there were medical professionals to provide services, Reverend Evans said,
I personally believe that abortion will never again be illegal as we have known it to be in the past. The public will not allow it, including the 8,000 plus women who passed through the Upstate New York Clergy Consultation Service.
Yet, here we are again. Thank you.
So now for the next part of our program, we are going to hear from a minister who was here in this church, who was part of the Clergy Consultation Service. Reverend Richard S. Gilbert is Minister Emeritus of the First Unitarian Church of Rochester after having served there for 32 years. He was a Unitarian minister for 44 years. He served this church, First Unitarian Society of Ithaca, from 1965 to 1970 before going to Rochester, and then returned as interim minister from 2003 to 2005. In 1995, he received a Holmes Weatherby Award of the Unitarian Universalist Association for faith-based social justice work. He has written several books, one on the connection between spirituality and social action. He is working on a book about this topic. I first learned of Dick Gilbert's work with the Clergy Consultation Service at a UUA webinar about the history of the CCS last spring. I was shocked when they introduced Dick Gilbert to tell about his work when he was minister of this church, our church. I have to confess that tears were running down my face as I realized that he and David Evans and many more did this work at great possible personal risk for those of us who might have sought out abortions then. They did this work for us. I am so grateful. Dick.
I'm grateful to the readers who have brought this story so dramatically to you. And I was a part of it, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. But first, I'd like to quote from the poet E.E. Cummings. He concludes his poem, "Pity this busy monster, man unkind," in these words: "We doctors know a hopeless case if, listen, there's a hell of a good universe next door. Let's go." Well, if you know of a hell of a good universe next door, please do let me know. However, unless you have a Harry Potter diploma in the world of wizardry, we are pretty much stuck in this one. One immediate obstacle, of course, as you heard, is the decision of the United States Supreme Court, the Dobbs decision repealing Roe v. Wade. And even now, in the tragic aftermath of that decision, we have a new case before the Supreme Court, SCOTUS as we call them, FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. That is considering regulating the use of mifepristone. Let me try that one again. Mifepristone as an abortion. More than half of all abortions now are medically induced in this way. I'll say more about that. But the possibility of Margaret Atwood's dystopian Handmaid's Tale is really a very chilling thought. I have a particular and even passionate interest in this topic, not only because I believe in a woman's agency, moral agency, but because I have tried to defend reproductive justice for quite a long time. I use that term to include freedom of choice, equity of access, and community of support. And so my question is, are we morphing from the bad old days to the bad new days? This is my story. The phone rang in my office, right, very close to here, one day in the winter of 1969. My First Baptist Church friend and colleague, Dave Evans, was on the line. He wanted to talk about the role of clergy in helping women who sought abortions. It was difficult to get an abortion in 1969, as it is now in many places in our land. Abortion was essentially illegal in New York State in those days. Problem pregnancies were rampant. The rich could access them, the poor could not. In May of 1967, the Reverend Howard Moody of Judson Memorial Church in New York City, as you have heard, formed the Clergy Consultation Service on abortion. Dave asked if I would be interested in forming a similar group here in Ithaca. I was. Moody came to Ithaca. We met with OB/GYN doctors. We met with psychiatrists. We had theological and ethical discussions. We met with a Cornell Law School professor, Harrop Freeman. Any of you remember Harrop Freeman? Yes. Or am I too old? You do good. There's at least the two of us. Because we wanted to ascertain what were our legal obligations in this matter. What were the dangers? After all, what we proposed to do was in a very legally gray area, almost akin to civil disobedience, and we knew it. We secured the permission of our church boards, of course, as good clergy would. An answering service, you've heard about this, a answering service was set up. We were on call for a week at a time. Women came from all over the state. We even had referrals from liberal nuns and priests at Cornell. The goal of our Upstate Clergy Counseling Service on problem pregnancies was twofold. One, to provide all options counseling, and two, to repeal New York State's restrictive abortion law. The group developed a counseling discipline not only to provide consultation, but also to maximize our legal protection, should that become necessary. We counseled only in our church offices. We required a note from a doctor indicating that the woman was pregnant and how far along she was. In each case, we explored with the woman the options open to her, bringing the pregnancy to term, and then keeping the child, replacing it for adoption, or abortion. If she was accompanied by her partner, we were sensitive to the pressure that he might bring to bear upon her. And so we made it a point to always find time to counsel with a woman alone. To be sure, this was her decision. CCS provided us a counseling form to be used with each woman. One, my reasons for wanting an abortion at this time. 2, my reasons for or against parental or other family involvement in this decision. 3, the involvement and decision of the other person in this matter. And 4, my experience with and feelings about contraception. In every case, we try to determine if the woman might qualify for a legal therapeutic abortion in New York State. But that was only, as you've heard, only if the life of the woman were threatened. And that had to be certified by 2 doctors. Thanks to Moody's New York group and his assistant, Carol Kammen, along with many others, we had a list of safe and legal alternatives. With them, we had created a kind of underground network. We would not refer women for non-hospital abortions after 12 weeks. We used only physicians licensed in the state where they were practicing. All our referrals were out of state, where abortion was either legal or less restrictive than in New York. We went over the list of doctors for the women, their requirements, and of course, their fees, and you've heard something about that. Some of the women were poor, but financial aid was limited. Arrangements were to be made by the woman herself with the doctor, and upon her return, we advised a physical examination by her own physician and discussion of use of contraceptives and their use to prevent further unwanted pregnancies. We asked if they report something of their experience to us. Some did, many did not. We launched publicly, as you've heard, in the Ithaca Journal in March of 1969. Our caseload grew quickly. By February 1970, we were seeing 90 women per week. Over the year, I counseled over 50 women, but I will never forget one week when I met with 17. The women who appeared in my office were a microcosm of the social problems of the nation. A teenage girl whose Catholic parents would never give permission. A financially challenged married couple in their 40s who already had 6 children. 2 pre-med students for whom a child would have jeopardized their medical careers. And most dramatically, a Native American woman who threatened suicide as she rushed out of my office. And so the decision was a tough one in every case. None of these women took the matter casually. The women had abortions, as you've heard, in England, Puerto Rico, Japan, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, among other places. There were 2 legal New York State abortions out of 6 attempted. One woman we referred, as you've already heard, died. From the beginning, we combined counseling with legislative advocacy. Our Republican Assemblywoman, Connie Cook, introduced a bill to repeal New York's restrictive law. Nelson Rockefeller was our Republican governor. The Assembly was run by Republicans. The Senate was run by Republicans. My, how the times have changed. The debate on the Assembly floor was bitter and the vote was close. The bill passed when Auburn's Democratic Assembly member George Michaels, whose son I knew as a student activist at Cornell, up at the God Box, Annabelle Taylor Hall, CURW, when he changed his vote at the last minute and cast a deciding vote, decriminalizing abortion as of July 1st, 1970. In the next election, he was swept from office. And to this day, I regret not having gotten myself involved in his campaign. Let that be a lesson to us. Both these legislators in my book were profiles in courage, one Republican, one Democrat. It had been heartbreaking to work with these women, with desperate women who were forced to sneak about like common criminals to exercise their right to control their own bodies. And so, with a great sense of relief, we disbanded in June of 1970, thinking, foolishly, that our work was done. Our relief turned to hope when the U.S. Supreme Court in 1973 passed Roe v. Wade, decided Roe v. Wade. I engaged with other issues. There were plenty of them out there. Obviously, I took my victory lap a little prematurely. After moving to Rochester in 1970, I joined a Citizens Review panel for research in mifepristone and misoprostol trial, known commonly as the abortion pill RU 486. This procedure, or something like it, is now utilized in over half the abortions in the U.S., and that number is likely to grow, depending on what our illustrious Supreme Court decides in the next few weeks. Our local religious coalition for reproductive choice met with the University of Rochester pre-med students and had ethical discussions with the OB/GYN staff at the hospital, one of the local hospitals. I debated abortion with a pro-life couple, armed with the infamous slides of discarded fetuses. I vividly recall another debate on abortion with an inner-city doctor whose work I had admired. In the course of our discussion, he was asked by one of the members of the audience what he would do if his 13-year-old daughter, who was sitting in the room, had been raped and became pregnant. When he said he would insist that she carry the pregnancy to term, I knew I had more work to do. At one public demonstration, a young anti-abortion woman, discovering I was a minister, shouted at me, "Preacher, you're going to hell." Happily, as a born universalist, I don't believe in hell. So it didn't bother me. And I received some nasty mail, but no death threats yet. Our group had a much better interaction with the anti-abortion Christians for Life through a Quaker-led Claremont Circle process, which helped me to understand the basic humanity of anti-abortion people. It was an amazing process, and maybe some of you would like to ask about it later. But we did not change any minds, but we changed hearts to at least respect one another. As a universalist, what else could I do? With an anti-abortion friend who marched with me against the war in Vietnam and for the war on poverty, I served on an ecumenical commission of the Rochester Community of Churches. We were charged with seeking a consensus on abortion. We failed. A champion of the so-called consistent life ethic, my friend was the founder of the Susan B. Anthony List, an anti-abortion group, even though we have no evidence that Anthony opposed abortion. I'm writing a book on Susan B. Anthony, and that is one of my sections. But my friend wrote to me in these words, "Dear Dick, thanks for the consistent life ethics considered and critiqued. It is very well done, thorough and intelligent." She went on to point out what she thought were my mistakes, saying that she would file my paper away, as she did everything that I wrote and others have written. She concluded, "Thanks for the challenge we seek to seek the truth ever more completely and profoundly, Carol." We have not connected too much lately, but I think this exemplifies the need to disagree agreeably. Fast forward to 2019, when I chaired Interfaith Impact of New York State, and we successfully, along with many other groups, perhaps many of you, with the Reproductive Choice Health Act and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act. Roe in New York State is now embedded not in the criminal code, but in the health code where it belongs. Abortions are permitted in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy when all but 1% of abortions take place. And third trimester exceptions for fetal non-viability or to protect life or health of the woman. Contraceptives are more generally available in New York State. In New York, a woman's moral agency is respected. The Equal Rights Amendment on November's ballot would embed reproductive justice, among other rights, in the state constitution. However, and sadly, a Rochester judge has ruled it must be taken off the ballot for procedural reasons. It is now in litigation. Keep watching the paper. Well, that's my story, but how did I feel about it? Why did I say yes to David? I was 33, and this was my first solo congregation. Some of you may remember it. Very solo. I was previously an assistant minister and a graduate student. I had relatively little experience in counseling with women with problem pregnancies. I did believe in human freedom, human autonomy, reproductive justice, and David was very effective as a gentle persuader. Those of you who know him know this. Still, it was an extremely wrought issue. One of my colleagues, Unitarian Universalist Colleagues in Detroit, had been arrested for doing this, though he was not convicted. I suppose I was a bit apprehensive about my legal jeopardy, but I had board and congregational support. The counseling itself was very moving. Here I was, one who faced most ethical issues with typical Unitarian Universalist reason, helicoptering 10,000 feet above the issue in wonderful abstractions which we could put together so easily. But here were women, real live women with real live problems. This experience did, however, help me to develop a greater sense of empathy, compassion, and most of all, humility. It was painful to know that we could not offer much help besides one counseling session. These women were the ones who bore the real burdens. As I indicated, once New York's abortion reform law was passed, I heaved a sigh of relief, naively thinking the struggle was over. I have learned that on such emotionally charged issues, there is seldom a definitive resolution, only a constant struggle. And if you remember no other of my remarks, seldom is there a definitive resolution on such issues, only a constant struggle. Now looking back on what we did and looking over the social, political, and moral landscape, I conclude that in the words of my friend and colleague, the Reverend Davis, in the book of the same title, I was engaged in what he called sacred work. It was sacred because it affirmed human autonomy. It was sacred because it furthered human health. It was sacred because it represented the courage of troubled women. They are the heroes and heroines of this story. It was sacred work because I was supported by my religious convictions and by my denominations, which passed its first resolution supporting abortion rights in 1963, and several times since. It was sacred work because of the history of that movement and the cause of women's rights, from Susan B. Anthony to the present. It is sacred work because it is not floating in a helicopter 10,000 feet high, but because it emerges out of fundamental human experience. New York was the site of the first Women's Rights Convention, 1848. Now it is high time that New York once more take the lead in guaranteeing this fundamental justice for women. I see several immediate things that we ought to be doing, I'm afraid. One, continue to make the moral, social, and political case for reproductive justice in its broadest sense. Repeal of Roe v. Wade has opened a new dimensions of reproduction that include, but are not limited to, abortion, but miscarriage, and as we discovered more recently, in vitro fertilization. Abortion is health care, plain and simple. We can do this work through stories which may not create the truth, but they do illustrate the truth. 2, pass comprehensive sexuality education in New York State. Yes. So ignorance will not be so likely to lead more women into difficult dilemmas in reproduction. I see I have some supporters out there. Good. But our state legislature is very slow, folks, very slow. 3, become a safe haven for women from other states who cannot get or afford abortions. And 4, be part of the so-called pill underground and telemedicine efforts to make access more equitable. And 5, to advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment, assuming it gets on the ballot, as I hope it will, this November, so that reproductive justice and many other rights will be enshrined in New York State's Constitution. Dr. David Williams, one of my predecessors at the Rochester Unitarian Church, was an advocate for family planning who served on the executive committee of the local Birth Control League, the predecessor of Planned Parenthood. He did this despite the abhorrent and stifling 1870 Comstock laws, of which we've heard a great deal lately. When the controversial Margaret Sanger, a national leader in family planning, spoke at Rochester's Temple Beth Kodesh in 1932, she was arrested for answering a question about where birth control devices could be obtained. Williams then preached a sermon on the spiritual significance of voluntary motherhood and invited Sanger to speak from the pulpit of the First Unitarian Church subsequently. A group of 8 women from First Unitarian formed an organization that eventually became Planned Parenthood of Rochester and now Syracuse as well. When the organization found it difficult to obtain office space elsewhere, First Unitarian provided them space in the Gannett House from 1934 to 1937. This was sacred work. David Evans did sacred work here in New York State, here in this community. OBGYN Dr. Alan Brad did it by openly admitting he had performed an abortion in violation of the outrageous Texas law. He was sued, just what he wanted, but the case was dismissed. David is no longer among us. Dr. Braid is 76, but he isn't finished with his work, nor am I at 87. More important, neither are we. The hell of a good universe to which E.E. Cummings referred is not next door. It is here and now, but only if we create it. We must not go back to the bad old days before 1970 and 1973. We have learned that victory in struggle can lead to apathy. Defeat can lead to mobilization. Defending reproductive justice is sacred work, which taps our most important beliefs, our most basic beliefs, and tests our deepest faith commitments. I am proud to do it, and I hope you are too. Thank you.
I was a pregnancy options and sexual health counselor for 30 years at Planned Parenthood, and you were my predecessor. The Clergy Consultation Service developed options counseling. I now see. I never knew that before. And like you, we made it a point always to spend some time with the woman herself without a partner or a parent, because that was all important in terms of really knowing how she felt. Yeah. And Carol, you are just, you know, I just value, I cherish you. I'm so glad that you feel like, that you know how important the past is to the present, and how you memorialized these profiles in courage, you know, to illustrate to us that what we can do, you know, in the face of adversity, what we can do collectively. Okay, that's enough for me. So, does anyone have a question or a comment?
Uncomfortable. But now, I don't know about other denominations, but now there are more women ministers than men. I don't know where your other groups stand, but so women counseling women would be the order of the day now. Then it was a little difficult. You felt a little presumptuous talking with women about what they might do. But somebody had to do it, and we were here. And they were in front of us.
And there were some nuns involved also. There were some nuns involved as well.
Indeed, there were.
Yeah.
We won't mention names.
Okay.
And priests.
And priests, yes. Anybody else?
Sexuality education in our schools for everyone.
Okay.
I will put in a plug here. The Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ have developed a program called Our Whole Lives. And this, I think, I mean, I'm bragging here from my own denomination and the UCC, but this is sexuality education for everyone. And it's an age developed too, from very small children through adults.
Okay.
For male and female. No, I never would have said only female.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
Guys probably need it more. Guys probably need it more.
I guess I misunderstood, because I had this reaction like it can't be put on just the girls. Like, boys need to know they have to have that information as well, and be able to know what their responsibility is.
And that has been one of Planned Parenthood's legislative priorities, but it just doesn't seem to make it through. Well, from the reading you heard there was a fund that was established. We each contributed to it, and it was modest. And of course, in those days, the numbers are very different from what they would be today regarding inflation and so on. But it was limited. And abortion, if you had an abortion in London, in England, it was pretty expensive. And some people decided that's where they wanted to go. So we had inadequate resources. So now there are family planning funds available to move women from state to state, from red state to blue state, from anti-abortion states to pro-choice states. It usually is red to blue. So they could have abortions, and where it was legal. But that's being challenged. Texas challenges that, and other states too.
David gave a lecture at the DeWitt Historical Society, and there is a copy of his lecture there. I think he gave it to me years ago. So, so that's where the script came from. But there are more records that are being held locally.
So they're in the hands of clergy or churches? The personal records of, let's say, cases?
There are personal records available.
Okay.
Or extant.
Can I just say something more about records in the Clergy Consultation Service? So there is, and I can't come up with his name, but there is a historian at Princeton who has done extensive research about the Clergy Consultation Service. He presented at that same UUA webinar where I found out that Dick was involved here in our church. And I could come up with that name. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I can get you that information.
My other question is really, I'm sorry.
Just one more piggyback on that. In the book Sacred Work, which I referenced by Tom Davis, there is some of the history of the Clergy Consultation Services there. But what surprises me is that there are many records, because we who were counseling were told, don't keep accurate records in terms of names and so forth, because if the police ever burst into your office, you will implicate women, doctors, and so on. So I kept no names, so my records are limited.
I do know that David Evans received a telephone call from the FBI scheduling a visit to the First Baptist Church. And I get this on very good authority. And David and people in the church hid all the records they had. And the man came to the door, knocked, went in to see David Evans, and sat down and asked a question that had nothing to do with abortion. but they were prepared to hide the materials that they had. I think you could say that. He was an unusual person here, but the Clergy Consultation Service in Syracuse, Utica, and Albany were also in the Baptist Church.
Northern Baptist Convention. American Baptist Convention.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, what's required is that 2 different sessions of the New York State Legislature must pass any amendment to the Constitution, and then it goes to the voters in the following fall, which is scheduled for this November. And it was written up, it's quite long actually, and it covers many topics. It covers GLBTQ issues, and lots of issues besides pregnancy. There's no mention of abortion in the writing at all. That's about pregnant women or pregnant people. I don't know is that the case? I don't know. Partly it's because, at least in many places, abortion, like New York State, abortion is legal. They get more press time. We don't get too much press time.
Okay.
We're too reasonable. Well, I don't think we're too reasonable.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it is PR, because it's a lot more interesting and scintillating if some minister is inveighing against it and saying you're going to hell than some minister who's quietly counseling women to consider all options.
So thank you